Please listen carefully.
Hello everyone, welcome to the 10th episode of the Study Space podcast, a show dedicated to helping students like you earn better grades, navigate your college journey, and become lifelong learners. My name is David.
And my name is Julian.
And today we'll be discussing a very sensitive but important topic, mental health and wellness for students. As a disclaimer, this episode is not meant to serve as a substitute for medical advice or diagnoses given by a doctor or other healthcare professional. Please consult a doctor to properly evaluate your situation, give diagnoses, and provide other medical advice. Before we start, I have to ask, Julian, what's inspiring you today?
What is inspiring me today is, it's coffee related. A friend of mine, a work friend of mine, recently purchased a number of coffee flavorings and syrups that I can add to my repertoire of coffee drinks now. So basically, I am now able to create or replicate a bunch of drinks that one would normally see at like a Starbucks or something, like a caramel latte or a hazelnut latte or a vanilla latte and such like. I mean, the vanilla is easy to do if you have like vanilla extract, but I have like the syrups direct from Starbucks now that I can add to my drinks. And to me, coffee is fuel. Fuel is inspiration, or at least it leads to inspiration. It opens my mind up to inspiration. So anything that promotes my, let's say, nearly borderline unhealthy addiction to caffeine, I think is a good thing, because I am more likely to be inspired by things so that I can get things done. So that is what's inspiring me today. These syrups I got from a work friend to make a greater variety of coffee drinks at home.
Real question is, did you get any peppermint syrup?
You know, I did specifically request for peppermint syrup as a gift because, by the way, this is a Christmas gift that my work friend had trouble acquiring. And I had specifically requested for peppermint syrup because I used peppermint syrup in my own coffee in high school. I haven't since, and I hesitate to go out and get some now for myself because that's just enabling a really bad addiction, like an already pretty bad addiction. But if I receive syrup as a gift, that's not necessarily my fault, so I'm not going to argue with that, right? But unfortunately, my friend had trouble acquiring peppermint syrup, so I could not get peppermint syrup. And I was saddened because I could have made like a peppermint mocha, which from Starbucks is actually amazing, you know? But oh well, maybe another time.
Yeah, I love the peppermint mochas from Starbucks. I got hooked on
It's
them
good.
over Christmas break. Yeah. They are actually really surprisingly good. I don't like the normal mochas either. I just like the peppermint ones. So
Yeah. I was at a Starbucks doing my own thing, and this barista was walking around giving like really tiny like espresso shot sized cups as like samples. And he said that it was the peppermint mocha. And I was like, I'm not really a big fan of mochas. Like chocolate and coffee really don't go together super well for me, at least in drink form. I mean, I'm a fan of like chocolate espresso beans, but chocolate and coffee to me don't really mix in a drink that well. But I tried it anyway because I didn't want to like say no. Tried it, and I absolutely fell in love with the peppermint mocha.
yes, it is amazing.
Yeah. So what about you? What's inspiring you?
Oh, so what's inspiring me is over the winter break, I took the liberty to read a few chapters from my differential equations and my physics textbooks.
Getting ahead.
Right, yeah, like we talked about in a previous podcast, and It paid off big time because a lot of the first lectures from both of my classes covered exactly that same material that I was reading over. And so I got a head start. And so when I went into class, I didn't need to take notes. I could just pay attention to what the professor was saying rather than what he was writing. And I could really get, a good understanding, a better understanding of all the concepts. And so, yeah, that was really beneficial for me, and it really inspired me. And I'm going to make it a habit now to always read ahead at least a few chapters before every semester, because, it really does help, especially, easing in, getting back from the holidays, you're a little bit lazy. And so I think it's a good thing if you prepare ahead of time and just, get an early start. It'll help you get a lot more prepared for the semester.
Yeah, don't you feel like you have so much more wiggle room in terms of like amount of time you have to not understand something?
Right. Yeah, no, definitely. It's so much better because you can look at it ahead of time, and anything that you don't understand, you can just go in and ask questions. You already know specifically, rather than, walking in completely blind and then being very confused and not even knowing what to ask. I think it's important to pinpoint what you're really confused on.
And it gives you a chance to like lead the class discussion, right? Sort of propel the lecture forward, rather than the professor sort of like lecturing, blindly and not really knowing whether or not you are understanding the concept. And so then they just, either dwell on a topic for too long, or they gloss over a topic that might be hard to understand for students, but the professor might think it's easy and they just gloss over it, right? So asking questions and looking ahead will, I think, allow you to mitigate that sort of risk and be a leader during discussions in class, which I think is a good thing.
Right, definitely. So I guess let's start the podcast. Julian, you have a few points that you want to go over before we start?
Yeah. So again, this episode is meant to talk about, we're going to be talking about a really, really sensitive topic here, right? And that's mental health. So just, it's a little bit of a trigger warning. This episode's not, just to repeat, not meant to serve as any sort of substitute for medical advice. So if you are concerned about your state of mind, please consult a medical professional. This is not like, we're not medical professionals by any means. We're just going to be talking about our personal experiences with mental health issues that we've observed in other people and also within ourselves as well. Okay, so we're not by any means providing any medical advice. We're just giving our experiences and how we worked to go through some of those issues today. Okay. So before we really get into the meat of today's episode, I have a little bit of a story. It's unfortunately not a really happy story. So some of you might be aware that in freshman year, in my first year of university, I worked at the university library. And my university library is a very beautiful library. It's actually like, it's 8 floors tall. There's this atrium in the middle, and it goes all the way up the 8 floors that we have. I think it actually goes up to the 7th floor. The eighth floor is like all entirely flat, but there's a center part of all the floors where it's completely exposed to the bottom floor. So in the middle of every floor up until the 7th floor, it's just a hole that you can look down to the first floor. And I think a lot of you probably know where I'm going with this. So in my first year of university, I think this was around my second semester. I want to say it's my second semester. I was shelving books back onto the shelves, and in the morning, I want to say this is like around like wintertime. Somebody had jumped from the 7th floor down the atrium.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and this was during class. Like, class was in session, so this wasn't during like an academic break or recess. This was the middle of the day, in the middle of when class was in session, and people were going in and out of the library. And just as a reminder, my university library is actually not a sole university library. It's actually a university and public library combo. So not only are there students walking in and out of the library, public patrons are walking in and out of the library as well. So the public has full access to my university's library. And yeah, this individual had jumped from the 7th floor in my library to his death, unfortunately. And that's a really tragic story, but I think what my university did really well was that they were very quick to point students toward a lot of the mental health resources and mental wellness resources that were offered on campus and also in the nearby community, which I think was great. The tragedy is that the individual who had jumped was a student, not a student at my university, but a student nonetheless. We found out that he was a student, and apparently, reportedly, not 100% sure here, but reportedly he had a great deal of stress and anxiety with unemployment as a student. A lot of graduating students face this sort of stress and anxiety with, finding a job, trying to enter the job market as you're graduating university. Like that's like the next step, right? Is you graduate from university, you're trying to find a job for yourself. And I suppose this individual had felt a great deal of stress in that endeavor, and that possibly might have led to this tragedy here. The point is that mental health is an enormously important issue for students. And I think students are very vulnerable in this aspect because tell me how you feel about this, David, but I feel like going through school, like going through public school, I sort of like people were rewarded obviously for being correct, right? For being right all the time. And the students who were wrong, it's like other students would laugh. Sometimes teachers would joke about it, not like bullying, but like, make like a sort of lighthearted joke about making mistakes and such like, which like might be lighthearted, but it might make you feel like, being wrong is not okay. Like I cannot fail. You feel like being wrong in the moment is like total utter failure. Like, correct me, but did you get that vibe when you were going through public school growing up?
Yeah, in fact, I think that doesn't even just apply to public school. Now that I'm at a private school, I think these same principle still applies, maybe even more, right? Because now you're in an environment where everyone is extremely smart, and I think there's a sense of like, if you ask questions, and especially if you ask like a question that someone else might perceive as dumb, then I think you're really scrutinized, really judged harshly for it. But yeah, I had the same exact experience, growing up throughout all of my public schooling. I think specifically in high school. That's not so much of a thing in elementary or middle school, I think. But once you get to the high school level, right? I think just some students just feel like, perhaps they're better than you, and you're asking a question makes you like in some way dumber than them. But obviously it's not at all true, and it can make a lot of people feel really, really scared to even ask questions. And I think that's even worse, right? Like, I think it's even worse to be scared of asking a question than asking a question and being judged for it. That fear is really what I think drives a lot of students to have mental health problems.
Yeah, and I think it's not only like asking questions. Like, I think that extends to a fear of asking for help, right? And that is the reason why I think students in particular can be especially vulnerable when it comes to mental health issues, because I think there's this, I believe there is this general I guess, belief that asking for help means you're weak or you can't care for yourself, right? You're not independent. You can't fend for yourself. When really you should be asking for help when you truly need it. But since there's this general belief that if you ask for help, you're immediately just classified as a weak person, then that whole stigma just makes you discourages you completely from asking for help when you need it, and that can be a great source of stress on its own. Just that dealing with that stigma of asking for help or seeking mental health help when you need it. And I just want to use this opportunity to go over the fact that a lot of universities, I think this is a good thing, a lot of universities are accepting the burden of, or are really accepting the responsibility, I should say, is a better word, of caring and nurturing students that have problems with their mental health and their mental wellness. And so a lot of schools are having initiatives, they are constructing buildings, they are staffing offices completely dedicated to mental wellness. On your university, do you have any of those kind of resources on your school?
Yeah, I believe so. We do have a mental health center that is open. I'm pretty sure 24/7. I might be wrong on that, but yeah, we do have that, and I think a lot of people have gone to it. This is just disclaimer, like this is just the opinions of a few people that I've heard from, and a lot of them are like from Reddit and just like Facebook and stuff. So this is like sort of unreliable evidence. But just the people that I've talked to who have gone to the mental health center said it actually wasn't very useful. Which is quite interesting. I don't know if it's because my university specifically is doing a bad job, or maybe it's just not a good idea to try to, I guess, have a separate program just for mental health. I have no idea what it is, but there's something about the mental health center at my school that students are just not very attracted to, and the people who do go there only have bad things to say about it, pretty much.
That's terrible. Like, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know exactly, but from what I've been told, they said that they felt like it was almost a procedure, like a scripted procedure. They didn't feel like the people were actually there to care for them. They felt like the people there were just, it was just like they were just doing their job, right? They didn't really have any personal investment into it. They were just sitting there and going through the motions, not really trying to understand the student, understand where they're coming from. I know, like, my academic advisor, for instance, a lot of the times, she'll try her best to like give advice, and it'll just be kind of, this is not mental health related, like from my advice from my academic advisor, it won't be like mental health related, but it'll be very scripted. She'll just say like, oh, have you tried like study consulting? And like she points out these specific resources, and while that's like, I think it's okay, it's just not really useful for someone who needs something more personal, for instance, right? And I think that's a big part of dealing with someone's mental health is to really have a personal stake in it and say like, oh, I really know where you're coming from, rather than saying like, oh, like we have to deal with this problem because this student is going to drop out or maybe be depressed and spread this somewhere else, right? I feel like the school feels like it's a problem to deal with, rather than like, oh, we should actually care about our students. And I think that's a lot of where it comes from, where people say, oh, like the mental health like center is just designed so they can act like they're caring, but they really don't.
Interesting.
If that makes any sense, right?
Yeah. I know what you're saying, and I hear you. I mean, that's really unfortunate. It's like mental health centers at university, I feel like should be a place where students feel like they can go to just, even to just talk to somebody, right? Because sometimes I get this feeling a lot personally, is that I don't want to impose on my friends with my problems, because I feel like like as friends, I mean, I know friends should support each other at all times because that's what friends are supposed to do, right? I don't always want to just like throw problems, like my life problems, on my friends. And having a mental health center to go to just talk to somebody, just to have somebody listen to me, verbalize the problems that I'm facing in my life is helpful. They don't even have to say anything. I just want to have a person there, an individual that is willing to listen to me. Like, is there something like that at your university? Like, is there at least people to talk to at the mental health center?
I'm sure there is. Like I said, I haven't been there. From what I've heard, I'm pretty sure they do listen to you before they give like a sort of diagnosis or anything. Yeah. I haven't heard from anybody that the just talking part makes them feel any better. Maybe it does, but they don't realize it at the time. Maybe like getting it off their chest actually does help them, and I guess the part after is what kind of like throws them off, right? Like that's a part that they feel like doesn't help them. But like you said, yeah, maybe that does help. I know that there was a person that I met, and he said that he went to private therapists, not therapists,
Private
psychiatrists,
practice,
right?
yeah.
Private practices, yeah. Private psychiatrists outside, like just in the city, but outside of school. And he said that they were much more effective at dealing with the problem because they actually they had a reason to actually care, right? Like this is like their patient rather than the school just dealing with another problem. And that's what they said. I'm guessing there has to be some sort of technique that they use that was way better, like maybe listening to the patient perhaps and making a diagnosis based on that rather than like just listening and ignoring it completely and having a pre-scripted diagnosis. Maybe that's the problem. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities outside of school for you to seek mental health. Private practices supposedly do a better job, so that's just from what I've heard personally.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think it's important to bring up that being students, right? You're not exactly in a position to like you don't have a job yet, right? So you're not expected to pay for medical insurance, let's say. So if you're fortunate enough to be like a United States citizen, and you have Medicare, right? Or I should say Medi-Cal, right? Or medical insurance, whatever it is.
I think it's Medicaid for the states. Medicare is a program for people over 65. So I think Medicaid is what you're referring to.
Okay. Yeah. So whatever it is, whatever medical insurance you have as like a dependent, you should use that to go to outside private practices if you don't feel extremely confident in your own university's mental health center and mental wellness resources. My university in particular actually heard a lot of good things about it, and this actually might be a cause of the fact that the university actually had just recently completed construction and establishing the new mental health center. I'm fairly certain there was a mental health center before they created they opened the new building, but apparently they had just built the new building like a year or two before I had enrolled, and I enrolled in 2016. So at some point before 2016, like really close to 2016, my university had opened its new wellness center. And I heard that it was a really great resource. A lot of students were taking advantage of it. The mental health center at my university actually had a bunch of sessions where it was like, especially during finals, they had this initiative where it was like a sort of like stress relief sessions in the mental health center during like midterms and final season, which I thought was cool. They also had a team of psychiatrists at the university working at the wellness center, so you can actually schedule an appointment to talk to the actually like professional psychiatrists at the university without having to leave campus. And I have a personal story to share about that. So I myself faced some mental health issues as a university student, specifically related to my parents and my family. And I didn't feel like I could talk through these issues with my friends, because as far as I knew, my friends had, like a full functional family. And so I didn't really feel like I could talk. I wanted to talk to somebody basically that could relate to me on that level, or at least had the training to be able to allow me to navigate through some turbulence in my family. And so I decided to take advantage of basically what my tuition money is going towards, which is the wellness center, right? So I scheduled an appointment with the wellness center, and I think my university has the system where you go in for like an initial appointment where you talk through your problems with a psychiatrist, so that they get a sort of profile on where you are, so that they can point you to the right resources or the right specialist for that issue. And then and then they schedule the subsequent sessions after that first one. So I went in for the initial consultation, and I gotta tell you, talking through your problems with somebody who understands you, or like at least seems to understand you, it takes a great deal of the stress off my shoulders. Like I legitimately could not talk about my problems to anybody, and this was like one of the first times where I could truly just let it all out to somebody, like a person just listening, and that just felt amazing. So just to let that out to somebody was amazing, and he was extremely helpful. Obviously, my experience was very positive with this doctor. Unfortunately, I mean, this is a good sign, is that there were several psychiatrists there, but they were booked like all the time. They were fully booked for like follow-up consultations all the time. And when I had come in, right, the initial consultation was like easy to get, because everybody's allowed like a really fast initial consultation. But for subsequent appointments, they need to schedule it, later on. And unfortunately, I had come in at a point where it's like I needed help now, but the next sessions would be scheduled like next month or something, because they were just that booked. And like, I don't really pit that on the wellness center. I think that just goes to show that they're so good that they are a popular resource. Like, a lot of people are willing to take advantage of them because they're just so good. So I think that's a good sign. And my psychiatrist had known that like this seems like a situation where you sort of need help immediately, and so then he pointed me to a bunch of resources nearby, private practices nearby, that might be able to help me. So my experience with my school's wellness center was actually overwhelmingly positive. The doctor I had was great. He was able to point me to a bunch of resources, both that I can read on my own, and also outside, since he knew that he was booked like to the brim with appointments, and so he was able to do that for me. And I thought that was really great. Do you know anybody who, I mean, like, what's your opinion on that? And also, do you know anybody who might have had like tried to have a similar experience with your health center?
Well, I mean, my reaction to that is, well, I'm glad that I'm glad that you had a really positive experience with your mental health center. I know that's not the case at my school. I mean, just an interesting statistic, not statistic, but they did a poll of just like a bunch of students from universities across the country, and my school was ranked like 5th in depression.
Ooh.
That's obviously, this is not like hardcore like data, because it's just taking polls of students.
Mm-hmm.
These are just student opinions, and it might have been like skewed perhaps. Maybe they were sampling the wrong people, but Yeah, fifth in depression across the United States. I believe number one was like University of Pennsylvania or something. I can't remember the others. Oh, two was UCLA. Yeah, and then fifth was Johns Hopkins. And I don't know what it is. It might be the fact that, like I said, the mental health center here is terrible. It just might just be my school. I don't know. Perhaps they're just not investing in it enough, or they're not hiring enough psychiatrists, or perhaps, I don't know, they're understaffed. There has to be some sort of reason why people really don't feel like it's a positive experience. I have not met anyone who has had a positive experience at my college's mental health center, or just doing anything. Like the way that I've heard people actually like coping with their mental health and really, trying to seek help is actually through other means, right? Through like just talking to other people, right? Perhaps talking to a friend. Or I remember when I was at, like, not orientation, but just a visit in to the campus, there was a girl there, and she was talking about her imposter syndrome. And I'll get a little bit into imposter syndrome a little bit into the podcast, but she was talking about it, and she said she did seek help, and it wasn't through the mental health center. I don't believe, if I recall correctly. I think she said it was just through like her peers and people around her, adults that knew her, not actually the mental health center. So I think that's a really good alternative for people who don't have, like a really good mental health center, or don't have one at all. I know some schools probably don't have one. For me personally, like, I think I haven't been to a mental health center. The way I've dealt with my problems is talking with friends, and it's really, really good to just have like a friend who's there for you, and who you can talk to, right? Like that's how I was able to deal with my first week of school. Like it was just a really simple, like my friend asked me, he was just like, hey, how you doing? Like I know you're like complaining a lot about your classes, and you seem like you're struggling. And I was just talking to him, and we had a really good conversation, and that kind of let it off my chest a little bit. And so just having someone who's there to check up on you and really make sure that you're mentally healthy, I think that's really, really good. And that's a really good, I don't want to say resource. It's just a really good thing to have around you, because I think your friends do have a personal investment in you. I'm sure the adults around you who know you really well have a personal investment in you, and they really want you to do well, not just because they want to, solve a problem of like university mental health, but because they actually care about you. And I think that's really good. Yeah,
I think
that's what worked for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think your friends, your family, even faculty members, like professors that you have a personal connection with, are like, don't make the mistake of thinking that they are not personally impacted out of concern, out of personal concern for you when you are having mental health issues, right? They're there to help, and I think they're more willing than you might think they are to be, just talking through your problems or helping you navigate that part of your life, because you're probably not alone in the issues that you face. So just talking it through with anybody that's close to you, and again, it could be your friends, family, even faculty. Like I have been able to confide in my professor, like one professor in particular, with a lot of my problems, and she is just, an amazing professor to just take some time out of her day and schedule to just talk to me. So anybody that's close to you can and probably will be personally affected by just out of concern for you. So that's not a negative thing. That's showing that they are willing to help you through those issues. So just talk to somebody, right? I want to go through some impacts of mental health issues on students in particular. Okay, a couple of key areas where mental health issues can personally impact students negatively is in academic performance. That's very clear, right? If you are not in the right state of mind to learn, then your academic performance is going to be hindered by a lot of the issues that you face, and that's never a good thing, right? The Suicide Prevention Resource Center, all of this is all of what I'm saying here is from the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, which we'll be linking in the show notes. They say that energy is another area where mental health issues can negatively impact students. Students feel less energized. They feel less motivated to go through the motions of being a student, performing well, and all of those aspects of being a student. They also lose focus, lose concentration, right? So they have difficulties with concentrating on their studies, focusing on certain tasks and such, which can lead to, again, a decrease in academic performance. And so I want to give a couple of statistics here. So there was a study done, and this is again reported on the Suicide Prevention Resource Center's website at sprc.org. They say that the American College of Health Association conducted a survey where college students identified the following mental health issues as negatively impacting their academic performance. Quote, so 30% of those students said stress negatively impacted their academic performance. I mean, that's obvious, right? School is stressful. Exams are stressful. Projects are stressful, right? And stress, some people like to say like, oh, I work really well under pressure. And that might be true. Like I can, definitely resonate with that. I definitely feel like more motivated to work when I'm under pressure. But overwhelming stress can bog down a student, which can lead to decreasing academic performance. Another area is anxiety. 22% of students report anxiety affecting their academic performance. Sleep difficulties, 20%, right? 20% of students reported sleep difficulties contributing to a negative impact on academic performance. I mean, you and I, David, we talk about this all the time. Like, I think I personally have repeated this point basically in all of our episodes, that sleep is like super important to performing well in school.
Yeah, definitely. No, I've been, so for the past week, I mean, obviously I just started school again, but I've been getting a lot of sleep, like 8 hours, a night. And then I've noticed that it's been actually really positively impacting like my performance in class. Like I've been really able to pay attention. I know last semester there were lectures where I just kind of felt like I was sitting there just mindlessly, passively absorbing information, not really like kind of taking my time to understand what the professor was really saying, digesting it all. And this semester, I think that's not becoming a problem anymore because I'm actually getting a lot more sleep and I'm really able to pay attention so that when I get down to it and I do my homework and my problem sets and stuff, I really do understand exactly what I learned in lecture. And so that actually, contributes more time back to you. That gives more time back to you because you're now able to spend so much less time going over stuff that you should have been paying attention to in lecture. And I think that's been really positive for me. And I recommend everybody to get a lot of sleep. I know we emphasize that a lot, but it's super important.
Yeah. And I like that you stress everybody needs to get the right amount of sleep. So we're talking to you night owls. Okay, just because you work better during the night, which I believe that you do, like the night owls and early birds are actually a thing. People work better in the mornings. Other people work better at night. That's a real thing, but that's no excuse to depriving yourself of necessary sleep, right? If you work better at night, then work into the night, but also allow yourself the time to get 6 to 8 hours of sleep, preferably closer to the 8 side rather than the 6 side of that range, David, you consider yourself a night owl, right?
Yes, I do. I usually stay up pretty late, I'd say, yeah.
But does your schedule allow you to at least get the requisite amount of sleep if you decide to work into the small hours of the morning?
Right, yeah, it does. That's because my classes start at like my earliest class starts at 10:30 this semester, and the latest one starts at 11. So it's really nice just like being able to work into like around I want to say 2 a.m. and still get like 68 hours of sleep. Yeah, right. Like it's like totally perfectly reasonable for me to work into those late hours. Now I'm not doing that actually. What I've been doing is I believe last night I slept at 12:30, late, close to 1, and this morning I woke up actually early. I woke up surprisingly early. Like I didn't even use an alarm or anything. And my body just woke me up by itself, and I woke up at like 8:30 or something like that. And so yeah, I definitely see where the positive effects of sleeping a lot kick in, because when your body wakes you up naturally, I think that it's telling you that you got like just the right amount of sleep.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you're really fortunate to be able to have a schedule that allows you that. I know that's not reality for a lot of students, right? Like if you're a night owl, but the only class that you need is only offered like at 7:30 a.m., which is the case for some classes, then you're sort of out of luck, right? In which case you sort of need to force yourself to go to bed earlier at the expense of your prime time to go to bed. Because I think going to sleep and getting the requisite amount of sleep is more important than working during what you feel like is your most productive time to work, right? It's all part of experimentation. I mean, you try to sleep less, try to sleep more, try to sleep at different times, obviously, to figure out when you are most comfortable. But I think at the end of the day, you need to maintain your sleep schedule, right? So again, just to go back to the original statistic, 20% of the students that were surveyed said that sleep difficulties negatively impacted their academic performance. Now, sleep difficulties is different from sleep deprivation, right? Some people face sleep difficulties, which obviously lead to sleep deprivation. So if you're having difficulties sleeping, then I think the most surefire thing you can do is to just go see a medical professional to sort of get help with your difficulties sleeping. If it's something in your environment, at least you can identify that. If it's something else related to your physiology, then a medical professional can help you identify that. So go and seek help from medical professionals to identify what's causing your difficulties with sleep, because sleep and getting enough sleep can really help to improve your academic performance. Okay. And then there's one last line of that chunk of statistics here, and that's 14% of students reported depression negatively impacting their academic performance. And that, I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record again, but seeking a medical professional is really one of the best ways to help you not only identify the source of those issues, but also help you work to get through those issues, which I think is always a good thing, right? And again, we talked about this somewhat at length in the beginning of the episode. There are resources both on campus and off campus. Obviously, the on-campus resource are usually free. I think almost always free. And while they can be hit or miss depending on the university and depending on who you get on your appointments, you might have a better or a worse experience. I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with not liking your psychiatrist and deciding to talk to a different psychiatrist. I'm sure at your university, I mean, I'm looking at a couple of student responses here on the Reddit. I just took the liberty to look it up on Reddit. So some students say that there are some people who are really good at being psychiatrists at the counseling center, but there are others who sort of need some guidance in giving help to students. So there's nothing wrong with switching psychiatrists at the same center. Like you can just request a different person. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If somebody's not being helpful, then obviously you need to go to somebody else for help, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you have the ability to do so, you can also take advantage of your insurance and get some help outside of the university. So there's always that option as well. Okay.
Yeah, so I was going to give my just personal experience with mental health. So I really haven't gone through like any mental health issues like my entire life. I'd say I'm very fortunate that I haven't really had many of those problems. I know that like being Asian, like there's a lot of stigmas. Like I know in the Asian culture, it's kind of like looked down upon to ever seek mental health. Obviously, that's just a generalization, but I've seen that personally with me and the other Asian families that I know personally. Like a lot of my friends have, they have these sort of like tough attitudes where it's like, oh, like if you're seeking mental health, like you're weak or something, right? You should like just deal with the problem yourself, right? Like your mental health problem shouldn't be negatively affecting your academics. You should be strong. You should be able to succeed in academics no matter what, right? And I think that's obviously like a really really negative like sort of culture to be in. But like personally, I haven't had those problems, but I know that a lot of people have. I knew someone in high school who took their own life, and I don't want to get into any causes behind that or anything, but the way it impacted our community was really interesting, right? Because like I said, there's a lot of Asians in our community, and so a lot of people didn't really know how to feel, I would say. We've never felt anything like that before. We've never had that sort of experience. It was like, whoa, right? Like this is actually like a problem. And I think after that, a lot of people at my school really understood, the like other that mental health issues are a real problem, right? In any community, really, and that we should pay attention more, and we should really seek, like encourage others to seek help, right? I think that's something that's really good in combating like mental health problems. And yeah, that was just interesting to see. Like I up to that point, I'd never had any like encounters with any of my friends committing suicide before knowing anyone that committed suicide. Like I'd heard about it, in media and, and seen in movies and stuff like that, but never personally experienced it. So that was really interesting. That was eye-opening for me. I know it's eye-opening for a lot of people, because after that, a lot of people made it their, personal goals to establish like mental health resources and to encourage others to seek out mental health resources. So that was really interesting. I know in college, just like in the first semester, I had a friend who also committed suicide, and I think that it was a very different reaction like that the school had to that incident. It's really interesting because I felt like at the high school, we like the counselors and everybody else had a really personal sort of attachment to that to the student and to what happened, right? They went around to all of our classes telling us about what happened and what resources we should seek and what we should do now, and like offering us their condolences and stuff like that. And I think that was really really good. That was really necessary, and it definitely helped ease like the pain of losing such a close friend. University, I can't say they did the same. They sent out like a sort of university wide email, and they were just like, oh, this happened. Interestingly enough, they were more transparent about it, because I guess like the high school didn't tell everybody. They only told like people who personally knew the student who had committed suicide. That's really interesting. But aside from that, like they didn't really, I don't think they really did anything to personally, like try to help us through the process. I don't blame them. I totally understand, because obviously, it's college, it's first semester. They can't really. I don't think it'd be. I don't think it's in their best interest to go around to every one of his classes and talk about like the incident, right? And especially since college, I know like every lecture is worth like a lot more than in high school, and it's such a big campus that like I feel like perhaps they felt like it wouldn't be beneficial for them to do that. So I totally understand why they didn't do that. But just having that personal touch there in high school was just really, really good for all of us. And like I said, it made a huge impact. But after that incident in college, I feel like everybody just moved on. People, obviously some people had they really reacted to it. How do I say? They felt terrible about it, right? They're just like, wow, this is like really, really tragic. But after that, it was just moved on. People moved on, and perhaps that's perhaps that's a cause of the fact that it was only the first semester and nobody really knew him personally yet. Perhaps it's the fact that it's such a university and it's such a big school compared to high school that perhaps the impact wasn't as big. But that's just my two personal experiences that I've had with others, having mental health problems and committing suicide because of that.
Yeah, that's really tragic. I think you brought up a good point about your personal sort of a personal factor that contributed to what might be mental health issues, and that's like growing up Asian. Right. It's like we have those parents that are really tough, and that's not unique to Asian parents by any means.
I definitely don't think so. Yeah.
But that's like a stereotype. Like Asian parents are like really tough, But that's definitely not unique. I know so many other people whose parents are very, very, very tough and very expectant of their children. I'm looking at an NPR interview of Dr. Rostain and Dr. Hibbs from the University of Pennsylvania. They are both professors and researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, and both are guests on this NPR interview where they talk about mental health. And Dr. Hibbs in particular talks about the issue I just talked about, and that is that parents understandably want their children to do well, right? I mean, what kind of parent doesn't want their children to do well in school? And Dr. Hibbs mentions that there's this pressure that you aren't allowed to make mistakes, or otherwise your chances at a better life are ruined, or like your chances the chances won't come to you anymore if you make mistakes, right? So we see children, students, where they have what Dr. Hibbs calls destructive perfectionism, and I can totally resonate with that idea of a destructive perfectionism, right? I know during job interviews, it's like a stereotype that like, oh, what would you say is your weakness? And the stereotypical answer is, oh, I'm a perfectionist, almost to a fault, blah, blah, blah. And that's like a stereotypical answer that you do in an interview. And that might be a joke, but I think that's actually a reality. I mean, I definitely feel like I dealt with destructive perfectionism before, and I would be lying if I said that I don't deal with that issue today. Like I definitely I don't want to release anything out to the world without it being perfect, or like I'm very prone to disagree or make certain decisions based on whether or not something I'm doing or something somebody else could be doing is perfect. And that can get destructive, like I feel like I can never make mistakes. I cannot tolerate not doing well at everything I'm doing, and I've worked really hard to go through that. David, have you ever really dealt with like destructive perfectionism? What's your take on that?
Well, I guess that kind of ties back to a point I mentioned earlier, which is imposter syndrome. This is a huge problem for a lot of incoming college students, especially at, I'd say, like high ranking or prestigious colleges where most of the students there are really smart. Like I said, I dealt with this personally myself, and I know a lot of people who have dealt with this as well, especially during like the period of transition between high school and college, right? So like in high school, you were like perfect, right? You were the perfect student.
Oh, yeah.
Everything was going well for you. Like you
Yeah.
were getting top notch grades, and that's how you got into the college that you wanted to, right? Like that's how people get into Harvard. That's how people get into Yale, Princeton, Johns Hopkins.
Those
for
brand
instance.
name
And-
universities.
Right. Yeah. And so they feel like, wow, I got into this university. I'm really like, I'm at the top of the world, right? Like I'm super smart and super accomplished, and like nothing can stop me. And then you actually get there, and you're like, oh, there are a lot of really, really smart people here, and I don't feel qualified at all to be on this campus or to take any of these classes. Like this is ridiculously hard, and a lot of people face that problem, right? Like. Especially like when classes, for instance, like curve to the average, right? Like, and you might be doing like consistently below average. I know someone who had that problem, and that's how I felt at the beginning of some of my classes. I was like, oh my god, I'm performing below average. I'm not even average anymore, right? Like that's a problem to have as well. Like you were perfect your entire life. You were always at the top of your class, and now like you're average. It's like, oh, that's terrible. And being even below average, it's like that's an even bigger problem, right?
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to really conquer it, I'd say. Like I said, the way I got over it personally was to have someone there for me, and I was really, really lucky that he was there for me, because like I know that a lot of people don't really care. Like it's tough, but that's just reality. Like in college, a lot of people don't care about you. It's just like they're trying to get their stuff done with, and especially at top schools, like everybody has their own dreams, their own ambitions, so they don't really have, I guess, time to really pay attention to their closest friends or pay attention to those around them, especially. I was really lucky to have a person that cared for me like that. Not just one, but like multiple. But I think him especially, because he like would always like consistently just ask me like, hey, like, how are you doing, right? And that really helps. My advice is always to find that type of person, someone who you can really trust. It takes a lot of time. I understand that it doesn't come instantly. I was just really lucky to have someone like that. But imposter syndrome is really difficult, and the only way I would say to get around that is to understand that, and this has been repeated so many times, but academic success is not totally everything. There are more important things, right? Like learning skills, for instance, right?
Yeah.
Like you may have a lower GPA than most people, but if you have skills and you have really strong skills, in computer programming, for instance, if you're like an engineer or computer scientist, right? Like that's really important, right? And employers might even find that more important than your academic performance, right? So understanding that academic performance is not everything is, I guess, the first step to overcoming imposter syndrome. Now, that's not to say that you should totally ignore your academics. It's super important to really, really like get up and try to improve your study techniques, really like abandon your high school mentality and form a new college mentality of, oh, this is what I need to do in order to succeed in college. And we have plenty of podcasts on that. There will be plenty more to come, plenty of blog articles as well on how to succeed academically and how to manage your time. But like I said, the first step is realizing that academic success is not everything, and then going from there, right? Like improving your study skills and whatnot from there. It takes time, it takes adjustment, but I believe that with enough effort and really seeking out that help, I think that it becomes a lot easier to deal with mental health problems.
Yeah. No, I love that you brought up that like students who get into like a big name school, right? They feel really pressured to be like the perfect student all the time.
Right.
And like, I mean, props to all of those students. I mean, you too, David, for getting into those big name schools, because your academic performance and your activities and just you in general were able to gain admission to those big name universities. And that's an achievement in and of itself, right? But that can be a double-edged sword when you sort of have this mentality of like, oh, I've succeeded my entire life, and now that I'm, facing failure for the first time, I don't really know how to deal with that. And Dr. Hibbs in the NPR interview mentions that students these days, Dr. Dr. Hibbs, I should say, feels that students don't have as much exposure to making mistakes and failing because they're either protected from having those experience or they just, they were fortunate enough to be able to perform so well in primary and secondary education thus far, and then the moment they go to university, they start feeling the consequences of resting on your laurels, right? Or not really changing your mentality, as you said. And that can cause a lot of pressure on students and can lead to some mental health issues. And that's an unfortunate reality. But I think my take on that is that like what you said, David, you need to change your mentality. You can't rest on your achievements in high school because and this might suck because you work so hard in high school to get into those schools, but once you enter university, whatever you did in high school no longer matters. Like it might matter for like your first semester when you're trying to gain a leadership position in like a club, right, in your first semester in university, or like you're trying to establish your own club at your university, or you want to land like an undergraduate research as a freshman at your university. Obviously, you want to try to flex as much as you can, and oftentimes when you're that early in your college career, the only thing that you can lean on is your high school or your high school achievements. So that's understandable. However, once you're well into your college years, whatever you did in high school literally does not matter anymore. Like almost nobody cares. So you need to change your mentality as such that whatever you did in high school doesn't matter. So whatever worked for you in high school might not work in university. You might have to do more. Very seldom do I ever hear that students had to do less. I mean, you might spend less time overall in class because you're not spending 6 hours a day in class, but you might need to put in more work at home, wherever you study. You might need to put in more time and effort in those areas as opposed to spending time in class, because it turns out that a lot of your learning happens on your own. It's not all in class, right? So you think that you can just attend class and learn everything by osmosis. That's not going to work. You need to actually spend some time learning that stuff. So change your mentality. I like that advice a lot. So that's a good point.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess before we end, I just want to say one more thing, and this is personally what worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it would work for anybody else, but I think this is a key to a lot of things, but I'd say passion is really important in forging a new mentality for college, especially if you're encountering imposter syndrome or you're feeling inadequate. I know for me personally, like I felt really down because I wasn't like doing that well at the beginning of the semester. Obviously, by managing to form new study techniques and realizing what it took to succeed in college, I was able to overcome that. But aside from that, like I knew at the beginning what got me through, to actually like be able to see the end of the semester, was motivation and was passion. And because I joined a few clubs, as I mentioned in previous podcasts, I joined a rocketry club and I joined kind of like a space club. And what I look forward to every week was going to those, right? Like I really love rocketry and I love spending my hours during the weekend there because it gives me some time to just like, really apply my skills and do something that I love and really see the end goal, the purpose of my degree, right? And I think that's really important, and finding something you love is so important. I mean, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I know someone who majored in, let's just say he majored in something, and then he did it because he liked, not because he liked it, but because he was good at it, right? Like I asked him, like, why do you like this? And he said, I just like it because I'm just doing it because I'm good at it. Like I don't really have a passion for it or anything. And he was really struggling. And he was really struggling to find any motivation to do anything in his classes. And that leads to mental health problems, right? So I think it is really important to find something that you love to do. This is kind of a pre-college thing even, but I think it's possible to change your major in college, right? If you don't really enjoy what you're doing, really like choose something that you love, or at least do something on the side that you love. Because if you're doing something that you don't like, you're gonna have a lot more mental problems that you can run into. It's just a real lack of motivation, and if you don't like what you're doing, well, you don't really see the purpose in anything, and that can lead to depression among other things, and a real like lack of academic performance in classes, because you're like, oh, why am I even trying in this class anymore? It doesn't even contribute to anything that I love. So why am I doing it, right? And if you're in high school and you have that mentality of, oh, I'm doing this because like I'm good at it, and then you get into college and you're not good at it anymore, then you no longer have any motivation to do anything. So choose something that you love, not just something that you're good at, because trust me, you might not be as good at that as you think, especially if you're going to a world-class university. Like, you're just going to be like average among a sea of students who are very skilled at that particular major. And that particular skill set. So I think it's really key, really important to find something that you love, to find a passion, because that will help you overcome, a lack of motivation. That will help you, that helped me personally deal with a lot of the mental health problems that I had at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. I definitely resonate with that.
Thank you for listening to the Study Space podcast. We know that there are countless podcasts being published every day, and you have decided to listen to ours in particular. It really means a lot to us that you've given us your time to listen to two students ramble on about school. The show notes with links and everything we mentioned in the episode for further reading and learning are on our website at uniplan.dev/podcast/10. If you want to show support, share the podcast or tell a friend about it. Your testimonial to your friends and family is the most helpful thing you can do for us. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. That's it for this episode. We will see you next time on the Study Space podcast.